contact. Now this is something you probably haven't heard before in discussions of saddle fitting, but it's very important because remember, this panel, this is part of the interface between the horse's back and your seat. So this is what you're communicating through is the panel. So when this is sitting on the horse's back, it has to touch as much of the horse's back as possible. So what does panel contact do? It helps the tree to be evenly distributing the rider's weight with no concentrated pressure in one area. So let's go back and look at this tree again. So when you're sitting on this tree, all of this helps to carry the rider's weight, all right? When we put this on a panel, that absorbs and helps to carry that weight. So when we don't have even contact on the horse's back, we're increasing the pressure in one area. So it's called pounds per square inch. So we're distributing as much of that weight over the widest weight-bearing surface possible. So the two extremes you probably have heard of are bridging and rocking, all right? So with bridging, you have contact in the front, no contact in the middle, contact in the back, all right? So just like the bridge, you have land, you have sea, you have land, all right? So you're taking out a good third of your weight-bearing surface on the horse's back. So the majority of your weight is being carried here and here. So if you were to kneel on all fours and I were to press on your shoulders and press on your lower back, what do you think you're going to do? You're going to go like this, right? So you see horses going around like this, and they're like, oh, he won't relax his back. Well, that's because he's carrying weight here and here, not the whole length of the saddle, right? Rocking is just the opposite. Rocking is where we have a concentrated pressure in the middle of the saddle and no contact on either end. So your saddle's going like this. Okay? So what you get is a horse, again, who might go around like this, but now the middle of his back is sore because you've over-concentrated the pressure in the middle of the back. And there are reasons that both of these scenarios can happen. With rocking, you could have a saddle that's too wide. And because you have no stability in the front, you're now carrying it through the middle. You could have a horse, you could have a saddle that rocks because it's overflocked in the middle, or the tree's too curvy, right? Bridging usually happens by too forward of a placement. So if you put your saddle too far forward, you could be causing bridging, or the tree is too narrow. So when we look at panel contact, now we know what we don't want. We have to know what we do want. We want to make sure that when you sweep your hand up under the panel, you're going to go, you see how high up I'm putting my hand? I'm not going like this. The reason why I'm putting my hand not high up is because I'm essentially feeling for underneath the tree. Because again, it's the tree that bears the weight of the rider on the horse's back. So what I'm going to make sure of is that I have equal contact all the way through, all right? So not only do I have to go from front to back, which is your longitudinal contact, but down the rib cage also has angle to it. So I want to make sure that the angle of the saddle has the same angle as the horse's back, okay? So very often, foam paneled saddles, and you see them a lot of the country jumper saddles, they have a set angle to them. And unless your horse's back angle matches the angle of that foam, you're going to get concentrated pressure. And very often I will see gaps in the middle of those saddles, very tight underneath the stirrup bars, very tight underneath the edges of the back. Does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Do you want to check for bridging and rocking? Does that mean the rider's weight in the saddle also? Or
It's better to do it without the rider, because basically if it's not good at a standstill, it's going to get that much worse with a rider. Okay?
And would you girth or you don't want to girth?
In some scenarios, you do want a girth. Okay? If something's maybe on the hairy edge of being, it could be then you can girth it. But basically, we're looking at it without being girth. And I should say between 2 points, you cannot have a saddle that bridges and rocks. Okay, you can't do both, it's one or the other. So if you say to me, well, it bridges and then when I ride it rocks, the first thing my brain is saying is your saddle's broken. Because you can't do both, okay? You can't have a major gap underneath the saddle and then when the horse moves, now it's rocking, okay? Between these two bills, bridging can be used as a tool, okay? What's unacceptable is if I can see daylight underneath the saddle. If I have a 1/4 inch worth of bridging, I might not be overly concerned because again, remember, that horse is just gonna naturally pick its back up when it walks. So if it's super, super tight at a standstill, you need some area for that back to go to. So bridging can be a good thing, but the right amount of bridging. And that's where it takes a saddle fitter to look at it and say, well, it's just skimming the back, that's okay. The minute your horse moves, it's gonna come in contact with the saddle and away you go.
I have another question.
Yeah.
A horse's condition, as you said, is going to change. Let's say you take your horse out of work in the winter, and you start them in the spring, and then by the end of the season, they're different.
Right.
Most sure than they were at the beginning of the season.
Right.
So do you want to buy a saddle that's going to work for the whole riding season? Do you fit them before, or do you find a saddle that's going to fit them, that you think is going to fit them when they're muscled up, and you pad it until they muscle up, or do you get 2 saddles?
Yes,
Right?
yes. It depends on the horse.
Yeah.
That's where wither tracings are very helpful. You need to understand your horse's physical limitations and its physical abilities, okay? And I actually can show you clients' tracings. I have it in the pockets in the front of this flip chart of different scenarios where that can happen. There are horses that I work with that are seasonal changers, as your example illustrates. They'll be really buff and fit in the summer, and then in the wintertime, it's a whole different story. So in some scenarios, yes, having 2 saddles might be the best scenario. Having the same exact saddle, but set up 2 different ways for when the horse is at its peak fitness and when it's not at its best fitness. You might have to come up with a regime or a routine that you shouldn't have for certain times of the year, especially if things are pretty set, in your routine. You give them the winter off, you bring them out in February, March, you start them up again. Pretty routine. And we can look at those tracings. And I can even, if people are interested, I can show you how to do wither tracings as well, because that's a very valuable tool, especially in saddle fitting and saddle shopping. Thank you. Have a question?
Good question.
Sure.
I had a saddle that was bridging. My horse changed. He became much more broader over his back and shoulders. But my question is, I have a new saddle now, it works. The saddle pad underneath of the saddle would slide back. Why is that?
That's, anytime you have a saddle pad moving, it's instability. And instability is caused by incompatible angles, meaning your saddle wasn't fitting correctly, most likely in the front. Typically,
It was in the front.
Yeah.
I got rid of it, I sold it.
So in that paper I had with all the cross-section of the muscling, and also Leslie had mentioned it too in her talk, the horse changes from the withers back. Absolutely true. If a saddle, that's why I keep the wither tracings, is because that horse's angles change, it's going to change everything about the way that saddle fits. So if you had a horse that was under muscled and under conditioned and became more conditioned, it's going to change the way this area of the saddle fits. Typically, what we think of as getting a horse more conditioned does not always equate bigger muscles.
Right.
It actually can mean slimmer. So if you think of yourself, you go on a diet, you go to the gym, you start to work out, are you getting bigger or smaller? You're getting smaller. So the horse carries a lot of fat around its shoulder area and its wither area. So the more it works, it's going to actually get slimmer before it gets bigger.
That's what happened to me.
Yeah. So when a saddle starts to saddle starts to rock, it will actually pull the saddle pad backwards.
Okay.
Now, of course, the saddle really isn't going like this, I'm exaggerating the motion,
Yeah.
but as it does this,
Yeah.
you see the way the
Oh,
tree
yes.
point moves?
Yep.
It's gonna your pad backwards,
Ah,
okay? So, I don't know, how many of you saw the video this morning of the training level tests? Anybody? Bueller? Okay. In one of the tests, I can't help it, I'm a saddle fitter, I gotta watch these things. One of the saddle pads started to move, and I was like, because I don't, there is a certain amount of movement that will happen with a saddle. The saddle is not gonna stay absolutely ramrod still on a horse's back. There's got to be some movement, but it's gotta be relative to the horse, okay? If this saddle doesn't move, if it's clamped down as tight as it can be on the horse's back, you're gonna have a horse that moves like this, you can't have it. But when you start to see things move, such as the saddle pad, there's instability someplace.
okay.
And I think it was the gal who was doing the training 3 test. She was riding a more advanced horse demonstrating the training 3, and when she asked for the stretchy circle, the pad started to move. I was like, ah. So, but he, you know, out of all the tests, he actually seemed the most cooperative and nicest. So, and that's a good example. If you have a horse that's doing FEI movement, and then at the end of it, you give it a reward by putting it in a first level frame, saddle's not gonna fit the same because your horse is not moving the same way. When he's up and collected, and then you ask him to go like this, you've totally changed the shape of his back. Your saddle's not gonna stay the same. Okay? But I have a feeling in your particular case, your horse got thinner but fitter, and it made the saddle too loose.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive to what we've been told over the years. You work your horse, yeah, but Arnold Schwarzenegger doesn't do ballet,
Yeah.
right? It's the wrong body type for that particular activity.
Yeah.
We want our horses fit and stretched and supple. That doesn't mean bulk. Okay?
Right.
Any other questions about panel contact? We can come back to it if anybody thinks of anything.